Well, it's Monday, and it's Monday evening for you, Mr. Cote. So thank you so much for taking some of your evening to hang out with me here on a not so random Monday. I appreciate that, my friends. Good to see you.
That's all right. What makes this not so random?
Well, because we actually planned this weeks in advance.
Oh, I
Weeks.
see what you mean. It's our the occurrence of us being here is not so random. It's not that because I was gonna say. I mean, I feel like maybe we could have a computer check this, but I feel like every Monday into eternity is totally deterministic.
I mean, that's a fair point, but at least they keep sneaking up on me, Cote. All
Uh
right.
huh.
I turn around and all of a sudden it's like Monday morning, and I'm like, oh man, how did that happen? Like, where did I'm still trying to figure out where summer went because it's officially fall, and at least here in the Midwest, fall typically it's like a switch is flipped. So
Uh
it
huh.
was like 90 last Wednesday, and then Thursday it was like 50 and rainy and windy and cold.
Oh
Just
yeah, that's
like
that's no
that.
good.
No.
Rain is rain. Uh, you want to hear a joke that I like to tell every now and then,
Yes, I
Nate?
love jokes, Cote.
Do you know how you can tell if someone's an expat?
How?
Because they tell you. So I used to enjoy the rain when I
Okay.
lived in Texas, but ever since moving to Amsterdam, I'm a little like not sure about rain.
Sure. Sure.
I could do a little bit less with it sometimes. Like today, it's the rainy season, just like you
Okay.
were saying. But that's okay. Nature has to replenish itself. I
That's
I
right.
think
That's right. Well, and
so.
it forces you indoors, and I guess that's okay too. Sometimes
Yes.
we can't all live in Southern California. I guess is the moral of the story, Cote.
No, that's right. We can't all live there. We try, but it makes the
We
real estate
try.
expensive.
So expensive. So expensive.
Yep.
Well, so I usually start with origin story, and I do think that's a good place to begin. But we're definitely going to get into the whole expat Amsterdam and how a Texan ended up across the pond. But why don't we start with how it is you ended up in this strange space that we occupy, known as technology and software?
Well, I went to in high school. I went to a science academy school. It was called. Of course, in America in high school. And at some point, I was just telling this story last week. At some point, maybe when I was a sophomore, I forget if that when it was, but this must have been in '94 maybe, or '93, and IBM. They had a big campus in Austin. Actually, this will come to be a fact briefly here is, the System I, the RISC chips, I think were done
Yeah.
in Austin. And so IBM donated like an AS400 box to my school, I think. And then we also, for some reason, I forget why, but we also got a T1 line,
Okay.
if you remember that. And so
Oh yeah.
we had a T1 line, and then we had some fancy Mac that had that like fetch thing with that little dog that would run. And then but then we got an AS400, which we hooked up. I think it was an AS400. We hooked up to the internet there, and then we needed to like open it up for the other students and document it. So that is like right around when HTML was invented or made, and so I was tasked. I think because I knew how to like write,
Sure.
I was tasked with writing the HTML and files and man page files for how to use the computer.
Nice.
And so that is like I don't know. And then I guess even before that, my dad worked at IBM,
Okay.
and so we always had computers around, and he was always trying to get me to do computer stuff. He wasn't actually like a programmer. He worked on the factory floor for a while, and then he also worked. What did he do? He did forecasting, where you're basically trying to figure out like how many of these units of circuit boards should we manufacture
Sure.
this quarter to meet the forecasted demand that we have. And but as a consequence, like I had computers around all the time,
There you
and
go.
I would play them with my dad, and we would play. You remember Sierra games?
Sure.
We would play those Sierra games, and my dad would always buy the cheat book, where you
Okay.
got this little printed out cheat book, and it had hidden ink, and you would take this magic highlighter that came with it, and you would highlight it, and it would reveal the answers to what was in there. So
Jeez.
I spent a lot of time doing those kinds of things, and then once I as I worked on the HTML, going back to that part of the story, which was very enjoyable, doing
Oh yeah.
HTML and linking things, and even man pages were. I'm pretty sure I worked on man pages. I can't remember what the format of that is, though. I don't know.
Okay.
So then there was another person who was working on that project, and their dad was like a good old good old boy Texas like tech CEO type. He had this company that would install. They would go around to like banks and other companies and install, what was it called, like netware, whatever the networking stuff is, and they would set up that network, the LAN, the local network.
Man.
And so the internet came along, and this guy was all like, we should make, websites and
Totally.
stores. So we came up with, I'll have to find this and send it to you, but we came up with a brand called Shop US or Shop Us, probably intentional. And, so we started, he went around to all the people he knew and was like, do you want to be on the internet and have a store? So we had like a books on tape company. We had like Allen's Boots, that you could buy stuff from, and then banks. And so, we had to, this is way back when all you had was like CGI bin and Perl.
Oh, God.
So I didn't really do that much. I did some of this programming, but me and like 5 other people, programmed the entire, everything you would need to have like a little mall with stores. And then I think we sold 2 pairs of boots. By the way, which is revolutionary at the time.
But remember, there was a time, this is something that I know my son has no concept of, because I've got a teenager, he's 15, and so this is all just air to him. But I very distinctly remember the first time I bought something online being like, ooh, this seems sketchy.
Yeah,
am I really going to get what I'm paying? And is my credit card going to be stolen? And now it's just like, I think I bought 3 things this morning off the internet and didn't think twice about it.
Yeah, you're reminding me that I think what we did is we had, and I was like the web page person, so I did all of the HTML and web page stuff, and I think we had a form that was the order form, which then it would take all of that information, and there was a little, of course, like a CGI bin Perl script that would format a page to fax, and then it would hook up to a machine that would fax it to the actual store, right? Who would then ship it, right?
But they didn't have any of that fancy computer stuff.
Right. They had a fax machine, so you were basically going from the web to a fax, and then that's how it worked. So
that's legit.
So what happened? The story goes is that the Texas CEO he found out that the only people who paid their bills on time were the banks, and so he determined that we should only sell to banks. And then, so, you can make websites for the banks, but then and he sold to what you call community banks. So they're like the banks in the like little, a bank in a town, like our biggest customer, our first customer, I think, was City National Bank of Taylor, just outside there in Texas, where actually the Louis Mueller barbecue empire is from, as I recall. Anyways.
Okay.
So then, in addition to the websites, we started making online banking software, which nowadays everyone's used to that. But you could log in and see your ledger. You could transfer money, and you could also pay bills, which was a big deal at the time. And that was a whole other. That was if you think faxing things is crazy, and again, I wasn't part. I didn't really work on this core stuff. I worked on more front end stuff and at this job. But there were several people. There was a team of like 3 or 4 people, and they figured out how to basically code everything that it took from the ground up to do ACHs, to transfer money between banks, which involves it's basically how does it work? There's like a 24-hour cycle of settling accounts.
Yes.
And then this also involved, I feel like at one point it involved FTP, and there was a lengthy discussion between our security, they weren't even security people, our programmers in the bank, to be we should not be FTPing these files. Can you turn on SFTP or something? And
no, we don't know how to do that.
Yeah. And I think the that was also my introduction to the world of business, because being young naive programmers, we were designing out the system when we were like, here's something we could do. What if whenever someone wants to pay bills, and if they don't have money in the account, first we process their deposits to see if they have money from the deposit. And then if they don't have the deposit, we'll just send them an email that we can't pay the bill. And then you don't have to, charge them an overdraft thing. And the banks are like, no.
No.
They're
You don't
like,
understand. That's a revenue source for us.
yeah, they're like, look, son, that's not the way banking works. What you got to do is first you take all the debits out of the account. Now that means you withdraw money out. You hear what I'm saying? And then after that, then you put the deposits in. And if someone has not accounted for and planned, well, that's just too bad. And so like I think we lost that one.
And let's start with the largest debit first, so that we make sure we drain their account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and then that later on, that company came to be known as Funds Express. Of course, with camel case with the E dropped out of Express, and so a capital X.
Of course.
And they were acquired by some PE firm, and I feel like I don't think they eventually ended. Maybe it is at Fiserv. They ended up at some company that we know.
Sure.
So yeah, and then I had a bunch of other programming jobs after that.
Nice. Well, let's see. So Deshaun is with us. So we'll say hello to again. Good afternoon, Deshaun. How are you? I know you're going to have some thoughts on barbecue, Deshaun. We're going to get to that before the day is over. And Deshaun also has done the web to fax thing. So I feel like I've done that too at some point, but I may have blocked it out of my memory banks as much as possible. And then
what would be amazing would be to do the fax to web. Maybe we could work on that. We could do
that's interesting. That might
OCR.
Might be a good demo project there for us to put together. So
I mean, one of my dreams, which maybe this is one of those dreams you don't want to realize, is like, how supposedly like Cormac McCarthy is hard to get a hold of, like he's completely isolated. Yeah. Maybe one day the only way that you'll be able to reach me is by fax.
By fax. The only thing Coté responds to now is fax.
Yeah, I mean, there's not even a guarantee of response. It's just the only thing I have that I will accept communications. So if you want to get a hold of me, you got to use, as Hunter Thompson would call it, the Mojo machine. I think that was a teletype, not a fax. Probably. Who knows?
Well, I do want to make this crack about Deshaun here. So FTPs. When I first saw that, Deshaun, my thought was FTP the nachos, and I was like, I'd like you to FTP me some nachos. I'm all in favor of that.
You could fax a nacho.
I think you could.
It would ruin your fax machine, but you could.
Well, right. It wouldn't be good at the fax machine at all. But we also have to, of course, say good evening to Fuel Snable. Hello, Fuel. He claims that there is only one format, and that's latex or LaTeX. LaTeX. See, that's what I love about so many of the words in technology. There's only one way to pronounce them.
I think that's how you pronounce it.
LaTeX. I mean, come on. We have to have as many overloaded terms as we possibly can. Fuel would argue that paying bills on time goes against his beliefs. It's probably fair, and then that all important files should be sent with email. I think there's nothing that could possibly go wrong by sending.
It certainly is nicer. Like I have these accountants, and they always want me to like upload files to their portal, and it's annoying. I mean, I know it's good. Right, but it's just like not fun to go to their portal.
Exactly. So Fuel want to know if that was Fun Express is the way of saying that. That would be.
It was pretty fun, but it was Funds Express.
There you go. And then last comment here. Notification hell we've landed in. I think faxing. I mean, with the amount of overload we have between SMS and email and Slack, it's really hard to find the signal in the noise. So maybe that's what we all have to do, revert back to just having a fax machine.
Yeah, you could choose one channel and choose, with some of these productivity people, one thing I've learned from all this, how to lead a productive life business, is like, you should, if someone wants to use your attention or do something with you, you should assign them a series of homework. And
Do you
it's
really want my attention or not?
right, because everyone's going to say they want to put in the effort, but you need to actually have them demonstrate like 1 to 3 pieces of homework they have to get through, right, to
Right.
do something.
Right.
And I don't always put this into practice, but it's a good thing to like have someone put some work into play. And so, for example, like if all you had was a fax machine, they would have to
Right.
figure that out. Like
Right.
that's
Do you even have a fax machine?
I bet we have like usually big companies you have
Oh
like
yeah.
a virtual fax machine. We should
Well,
test
I
that out.
know.
We could start
And one,
faxing each other.
sure, sure, and then that'd be the way we'd communicate with each other. I very distinctly remember at one point in my career, our expense reporting was online. In fact, a couple of my friends worked on it, and I helped them with some problems I ran into. But you had to fax all of your receipts in, and that would then trigger essentially an OCR routine that would then load it into the app
Oh, that
as
makes
opposed
sense.
right, because there was no other way you could possibly get that information in there. So yeah, let's see, what is fuel had another thing. Yeah, I agree with fuel. Turn off notifications. In general, I think that's a wise idea to just turn off the notifications. And then I have to go back and say hello to Raul from Monterrey, Mexico. So we're covering a lot of countries here today, Cote.
Looks like 2 so far.
At least three, I think, if I get the count right.
Oh, and I see someone was a best Sierra game. I enjoyed the King's Quest series because you could actually like build up your character instead
There you
of
go.
other things. That
Sure,
that was
sure.
that was fun.
And then,
I think
then
you could
fuel.
even like take your character across the various versions of that game,
Oh yeah,
which is fun.
totally. Fuel also asked if they heard a young programmer in the background.
Yes, always.
The joys of our work from home lifestyle, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we have an office here in Amsterdam, and I've started going into it
Okay, how's that working
so
out for you?
that the young programmer can study on her own.
Yeah, that's pretty wise.
It's really nice. It takes a while to bike there, but then
Okay,
it's nice that it takes a while to bike there. I get
sure,
some exercise, but
sure, sure, sure.
since it's been rainy, I haven't quite built up the. I don't know. I got to figure that out. But
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of. See, to me, there's three weather conditions that you have to think about doing an outdoor activity in. There's cold, there's wind, and there's rain. And I'm of the
huh?
opinion that you can handle two out of the three fairly straightforward. It's but you got three out of three, like forget it. I'm done. I'm not going unless there's some
Yeah.
really extreme circumstance. And of course, it depends a little bit on how excited you are about the outdoor activity for sure. If
Hmm.
we're
Hmm.
talking golf and I'm in Bend in Oregon, I'm playing on all three and I don't care. I got the gear. It'll be fine. If we're talking about riding my bike, which to be clear, I do really enjoy doing, I think one is all I'm waiting for. Like, and rain, it's probably not happening. I've got a trainer in the basement. I'll ride indoors before I'll go ride in the pouring rain.
Sure. Rain's not
Beach,
fun
no,
on
I'm
a
not a
bike.
big fan of rain. And then the joy of friction becomes a little different there, and all of a sudden you wipe out and hurt yourself, and that's never great. That's never great.
Yes.
So, all right. So Fuel said they received a customer database on email containing personal data. Outstanding. Yeah, I bet we have slightly different rules about that today. I would hope than we have had in the past. I pray. And then, well, David, thank you. You all are the signal in the noise. I appreciate hearing that. We try, right? We try pretty hard to deliver more signal than noise. At least that's the
Yeah.
goal, right?
Is it true that if you have enough signal that turns into noise?
Yeah, it could be. Or can you find signal in any noise? Maybe I don't know. Just not
Yep.
sure.
Pretty
Not
good.
sure.
Pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah. All right. So, we have Oklahoma. Code with Sean is here from Oklahoma, where the wind comes whistling down the plains, something to that effect. So, I do think that's a whole separate country, really, and especially if we're talking Texas versus Oklahoma. I mean, that gets tribal.
That's what I've heard.
Now, who
Sure.
who has better barbecue though, Cote?
I don't. I mean, they have food in Oklahoma. I've been there. I'm not sure. I don't know if they have like Oklahoma barbecue, but they definitely have.
Sorry, Coach
They've
Sean, I was off by
they've
one.
got they've got what's it called, bombs. You can get like you can buy like good ice cream and a hamburger and do a
Ooh,
little bit of grocery shopping all in the same store. I mean, those are up in North Texas, but like I think that's a Oklahoma type of thing.
Well,
Or
Sean's being very clear that Oklahoma is not North Texas. So
yeah,
just like
yeah.
Minnesota is not really Southern Canada.
My one of my grandfathers is from Oklahoma. His whole
Okay.
family. So we used to spend a lot of time a lot more time than most people do in this world of ours in Norman. But
Okay.
yeah, he was as he used to say a dirt farmer up
Ah,
there.
that checks
Well,
out.
his
That checks
family
out.
was. He was in the Air Force because he didn't want to be a dirt farmer.
Yeah, that
So
makes sense.
he decided to go fight in World War II rather than stay in
Oh,
Oklahoma. That
wow.
was his.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's a strong statement right there. We'll
No,
leave that up to
Oklahoma's
the
fine. My
interpretation.
my one of my kids was born there, but it's
There you
no
go.
problem.
There you go.
Well, to pick up the thread, Nate. So I
Yes.
wasn't a programmer all of my life. So then in 2005, I decided this was back. Remember, at least in our age range, when like outsourcing was the thing that was going to
Oh,
destroy
yes.
not even outsourcing, offshoring was going to destroy
Offshoring.
all of our
Right.
jobs.
Right.
So I was also like bored with the programming job that I had, I guess, and so I went to go work at this little analyst firm called Red Monk,
Mm-hmm.
and I was their first analyst hire after getting to know James, Governor, and
Yeah.
Stephen O'Grady there, and then I did that for like 5 years, and I think that was the big turning point in my career when I did a bunch
Sure.
of analyst work, which
I mean
was
that's
quite
when I
enjoyable.
first encountered you for sure. I very distinctly remember reading and listening to your podcast, and I still argue you've got the best voice in tech podcasting.
Wow, you listened to stuff from way back then? You've been
I
around a
did.
long time.
I dude, I've known you. I've known of you for a long time, which is why I was very delighted when I actually finally got to work with you.
No, that's
So
sweet of you.
thank you,
Well,
man. Thank you.
yeah. Yeah, I was remembering when Spring One used to be like just this weird little conference
Yeah. Yeah.
back in the 2000s.
Right.
Did you go to those events? And what was the name of the dude? He still runs the No Fluff
Jay.
thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Jay Zimmerman. Yeah, and he's got a few more new destination shows. So the Spring One was one of the, or was it Spring Two GX? I can't remember exactly what they
Yeah.
called it, but
Exactly.
yeah.
2GX.
So we had like the Ajax experience with evolved into the Rich Web experience. That was an event I did an awful lot of stuff at back in the day. He spun up UberConf, which is still very popular. ArcConf, which is one of my all-time faves. We actually
Hmm.
do two of those a year now, which is pretty cool. And then yeah, he still has the regional events. Obviously the pandemic has had some impact on people's desire to congregate, but it seems like we're finally starting to kind of come out of that a little bit at least. But yeah, no, it's amazing to see how some of those events have grown and changed and evolved. I feel the same way about like Dev Nexus. Several of our friends are behind that event, and to see when we thought that was a pretty big deal when it was several hundred people, and to see that basically outgrow its venue, or like the event formerly known as 33rd Degree, the Devox Poland, which went from
Hmm.
very small to it's I believe one of the largest Java events in Europe now.
Oh yeah, those DevX guys. That
Hmm.
are people, I should say. That's
Hmm.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So does that mean that the Ajax conferences are starting up in person again?
yeah. So I know Rich Web, which he changed it again. It's got a new name. I don't speak at that one anymore, so I'm only on like the ArtConf side of it. But that'll be in December in Florida, which is always a good time of year to be in Florida in my experience. Certainly
Uh huh.
better than here in the Twin Cities where it's usually cold and generally snowy. Um, ArtConf, we did a Midwest one in Chicago in June, which was pretty cool too. But yeah, it's nice to see some of that coming back. I know my schedule was pretty busy here until the last few weeks, which was nice, and then it'll pick up here again, actually starting the end of the week. But it is good to see folks back in the flesh. I have my grad students in person for basically the first time since the pandemic started, and
Mm-hmm.
it's I don't enjoy the commute, and I don't enjoy driving down on campus, especially when there is a football contest going on at the same time. But I really do like seeing my students' faces and seeing their reactions as opposed to staring at a screen where three out of however many actually have their cameras on. So,
Yeah. Well, that's nice.
trade offs.
Yeah.
So let's see. So Fuel says that it is the rain and dark period in Norway. So it could be worse, Coté.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it could be raining and dark.
Right. Right. That's a bad combination. Bad combination. And you've inspired Fuel to download King's Quest 3.
Oh
So
yeah, I
there you
wonder if
go.
that's probably still possible. It'd be
I
nice if
think
I still had my floppies. I can get my little character because I spent a lot of hours like outside the city walls with my little character throwing knives at a target to like
nice.
practice up.
Nice.
And you
There you
can
go.
sneak around so you can go steal like a lamp with oil in it. And then I think there was this weird creature that was like, those things you used to get at Spencer's Gifts that you would like squeeze and their eyes would pop
Yes.
out. Like
Yes.
there was something like that in one of the King's Quests, and I think it was called like an Antwerp, which
Oh,
now is kind of I realize is a funny thing to name something
right.
because
Right.
it has nothing to do with like 1500s printing and woodcuts or Bruegel or anything like that.
Sure. Sure.
It's just like a big blobby thing moving
Gotcha.
around.
Yeah, Fuel says apparently it can be found on a website, which I, of course, cannot vouch for whether or not it will do anything nefarious to your machine. But Fuel says it's out there. So, if you need it, it can be found. I actually just read, I guess, like a profile of a person who is arguably the last person still selling floppies.
Uh huh.
And he's got this surprisingly profitable business doing that. And I guess the genesis was he was working at a software company. They needed to print or duplicate their discs for people, and they were so outraged at how expensive it was to have it done by a third party. They just bought the equipment and did it themselves, and then they just kind of kept growing from there to, well, now we'll do CDs, well, now we'll do DVDs. But it
All
seems
right.
like essentially if you need a floppy, he is like the one person left on the planet who can sell you one.
I see.
So
Huh.
who
Well,
knew? Who knew?
now you talk to architects,
Yeah.
enterprise architects, Nate. How is it that they're supposed to like do their job such that they avoid that situation? The situation
Oh.
being like all of a sudden you're going along and someone's like, "Why do we have to pay $50,000 for some
Mm-hmm.
floppy disks?"
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, "Well, that's because we still use floppy disks."
Right.
And then someone says, "Why do we still use floppy disks?" And then you're like, "Oh, time to go to the company barbecue." But like,
Right.
do you like
I have a
set up
meeting.
a do you like set up a reoccurring to do item every 18 months that's like enterprise architect task? Make sure we are
Yeah.
not using technology older
Yeah.
than 10 years. Like what do they do? What do you do there?
So I think part of it is just having the awareness that the status quo is not free, and you do need to look ahead a little bit and start to
Uh-huh.
think about where do we need to move, when do we need to move, and actually kind of have a roadmap for what that looks like with some of these things.
Mhm.
I had a distinct experience years and years and years ago. We were in the middle of a merger, and the company we were merging with had some incredibly ancient, I want to say essentially like VB for the mainframe or something goofy, and it was one of those critical programs. We needed to bring it over, and but of course it was written in something that about 8 people in the US knew, so we had to pay this person a redonkulous hourly rate because, well, they're one of the 8 people that knows it. So what are you going to do? It's supply and demand. And
Yes.
we paid it just to get through the acquisition merger thing. And then once that was over, one of the very first projects we prioritized was getting rid of that thing. And we justified it obviously just in the pure expense of it, that yes, it will cost us X to replace it, but it's going to cost us this order of magnitude more to maintain it. Not to mention we have the risk of there's one person in this region that knows anything about it, and they may
Right,
choose
right.
to continually raise their rates. And so I think it's just having that awareness that you do need to migrate, and there is a cost to staying on old ancient things. I was having a conversation with one of our colleagues this morning about a client, and they've got some stuff that's running on like Java 1.8, and they're trying to get off it, but how do you convince people to do it? And so I think that's part of it, is understanding how do we convey this in terms the decision makers are going to resonate. It can't just
Right,
be,
right, right.
well, because Java 1 dot whatever is cooler, or it's got some nifty feature. They don't care. But
Right,
it's,
right.
hey, this is unsupported, and
You
we're no
pre-
longer going to get security patches, and we can't find anybody that can maintain it, and we don't want people are leaving the company because they don't want to work on this stuff.
Right, right. I guess you have sort of like cost, stability, security, and like finally like innovation. Innovation's a silly word, but
Yeah.
like you lose the ability to do these things, and so you have to speak to it in those sorts of terms.
Pretty sure Stein and I
Prioritize
found
it.
a room once that had a sign on it saying this is the innovation room or something to that effect, and we took great, I guess, joy in taking a picture of that and tweeting
Yeah.
about it. But Fuel says Java 1.8's the new stuff. Fuel, you and I need to have a conversation. And also says that we've apparently lost the Polaroid recipe. That's another part of this that's fascinating is you have some of these things that we just, nobody knows how that was done. And we didn't bother to pass the knowledge down. You think about how much of the knowledge we have is sort of that, mentor to apprentice kind of flow. Where is that all going to happen? So, and Fuel has thoughts on the floppies. What I did as an architect was to make sure we used floppies. And now I live the good life by selling my secret stockpile of floppies. So maybe that's it. We just find a way to personally profit off of it. I don't know. I don't know. Depends on your mindset, I guess.
Now, what version is Java at, Nate?
I think 119. I bet
One
this John
nineteen.
would-
You know, because that's picking back up. That was the last thing I programmed in. Now 119. I'm a little like, how come they haven't gone 2.0? Is this like some point of stubborn pride in the Java world that after didn't what was it called, Oak or whatever? Didn't that come
That was
out
the
in like
original name, Oak.
94 or 95? And so I was told recently not to do math in public, but I feel like that is at least 25 years ago, right? Now, is there
John
some
concurs. It is 19, and I just my quick googling tells me indeed 19.
and they have like what do they write in the Java world? I'm forgetting all this. They have a JCP something. Is there some kind of JCP document where they're like, we are never going to 2.0? Like some lengthy conversation about we should never go to 2.0? Because I feel like after 5 years, if your product hasn't gone to 2.0, you should have a logical explanation.
Right.
And after 25 years, I mean, I feel like the Oracle database came out in the early 80s, and in the 90s they were like at 11G or I, right?
Yeah.
So like basically you've got like two versions every two, or you've got one version advancing every 2 to 3 years, if I did that correctly. And so by that count, like Java should be up to like at least 10.0 or something, right? I mean, even what are we at with the Mac OS? We're at like 10 something.
Question. Yeah. What
And
are
then iOS is iOS 16, if I
Right,
remember.
right.
So like, and the iPhone's been around since 2007. So like, I don't really know what the Java community, like what they're trying to say, but
a great point.
I'm not convinced of it, whatever it
Well,
is,
but
'cause
remember,
I haven't
for
heard
a
it.
long time, it was Mac OS X, or was it Mac OS 10? I can remember.
I think it was left up
the
to say however you wanted to say it. And
Sure,
probably
sure.
it was probably fun to say both.
Right, and one would just like GIF or GIF. You're gonna irritate somebody by saying it whatever way you choose to say it. Yeah, so you're right. I'm on Monterey, which I don't think is quite the latest and greatest, 12.5.1. So yeah, it is fascinating how that works. So Sean says 1.9999. I'm not gonna do it. That I could see that. I could see that as a version name. And is it like an epic number? So when you go to this 2.0 version, everything breaks. Could be.
Oh, yeah.
So and then all your sanity are belong to us from Oracle. I could see that, Sean. I could see that. And then Deshaun's going to give us the whole list here: 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4. So that's a good question because I think most people just drop the one off at this point, and we just talk about it in terms of
See, there you
major
go.
number. And I don't know how much this has to do with sort of the you remember J2EE.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So maybe it's a remnant from that, like bad.
Well, now do they still have like the Corva stuff in there? Maybe this is what they're waiting for. Maybe they're like,
Right.
when we go 2.0, we'll drop Corva.
Right.
But
And
until then, we're just going to deprecate it, right? But it's still going to be in there. And so when we go to 2.0, we can break the rule of backwards
Right.
compatibility.
Right.
So I don't know.
Well-
Maybe they're saving that up.
Maybe, because I see Java taught me for a really long time that deprecated mean don't worry, we're never going to take this out of the language. It's going to be here forever. Because there were
Right.
so many things that were marked deprecated way, way back. We go before we even talked about like 1.0 ish version,
Uh-huh.
and it never got removed, and it just kept hanging around. I think we finally have some teeth deprecated, and I think some things are finally being pulled out, which is great. But having had several conversations with Brian Getz, I understand just how challenging it is for them and their mandate around do not break Java.
Well,
I
sure.
totally understand.
It's challenging to contradict one of your like top three principles of existence.
Right,
That's
right.
I think that's like their deal.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So Fuel says Corba is great, and that it's very hot right now. So there you go. And allegedly, you can do it in Python. You can do Corba in Python. Huh. Okay, okay, that's interesting.
Can't be that hard.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong? See, now Corba is one of these interesting things to me because one of my soapbox issues, Cote, is that this industry, we seem to take something that we've done before, give it some different branding, and then pretend no one's ever done anything like this before. So we've mentioned two things that are basically the same in terms of like CGI bin and Corba, and
Uh
I
huh.
could make the argument that microservices and serverless is just kind of the next evolution of both of those concepts, where I have some code running on some machine somewhere, and I don't care what the code's written in, and I don't care where the machine is. I just want it to execute this thing on my behalf. And with your position, especially having been on the analyst side of this, why do you think we do that so much in this industry, where we kind of reinvent the wheel on a regular basis and then try to pretend that no one's ever done that ever before?
Well, let me let my dog out of my office, and
Yeah.
then I'll tell you the story. This will be a cliffhanger. Do you have a
Oh,
do
I
you
love
have
a
do you have
cliffhanger.
a commercial break you can play here,
I don't,
Nate?
but I'll just talk to Deshaun about how. Let's see. Deshaun says I think something went from 1.4 to 1.5 or to 5.0, and then Java 1.5 is the same as Java 5. Yeah, I think that was basically it, Deshaun. To be fair, and then Fuel says that you can do a Python 2 to Python 3 shift where one breaks stuff and spend 20 years. Yeah, exactly, Fuel. That's a good point. I do know some organizations are always hesitant to make those shifts because it is the concern about breaking things. And I know there's been a lot of confusion around what we really mean by long-term support versus the interim, Java releases. And yeah, that gets into psychology of big enterprises. But so we reinvent the wheel. Why do
Well,
we do that?
I've been thinking about that a lot recently, Nate, and that's one of those things you think about when you have gotten older and you're still interested in the same things you were in your youth, and it's good. I remember when I was younger, I kept telling myself that when I got older, I was going to remember how like silly I thought old people were and try to bring
Right?
my youthful things. So I feel like that was an advantage to plant that seed. And
Sure.
when I was younger, the older programmers and people were always like, "Why are you reinventing the wheel?" Because that's how they sounded because they were
Of
older.
course. To us, yeah. When you're young, that's how old
And
people sound.
so I hear myself thinking that every now and then. Of course, I don't really because I don't program anymore. So like that's the great thing. Like when you're outside of a craft like programming, you really don't worry about reinventing stuff over and over again. It's really not. I don't think outside of engineering, people really care about that. Like,
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if you've like read any story about King Arthur, but people keep writing that over and over
Good
again.
point.
Same
Good
story.
point.
Alice in Wonderland, like
There's
the
like
same.
nine
Yeah,
plots or something,
yeah.
maybe
Once one
11.
either your Disney or the copyright has expired, and you just end up
Right.
rewriting the same stories over and over
Sure.
again.
Sure.
So, anyways, I mean, I think there's several reasons. One, I think, as we were just joking about with Java, it's very difficult to add new features to some chunk of software or some
Right.
architectural pattern, right? Like, and not only, well, I guess it's easy to add features, but it's hard to get rid of old features. So eventually, you just have this big hulking encumbered mass, and then I feel like at some point I don't know Java that well anymore, but I feel like at some point there was a good 5-year period where they were just working on making it smaller. And that was kind of like all that community was doing. And so like, you spend a lot of time trying to like, it's not necessarily technical debt, but it's just sort of like you're trying to like limber up so you can evolve, take things away and like be able to add new things. And so often that means that like, you just make something new because it's easier. It's easier to add something on. Like, I don't know, there's all these new programming languages. Why do they exist?
Great point.
Right? Why does Java exist instead of just C++ or whatever, right? Like there's all these books that tell you how to like not lose memory and how to do stuff. Why don't you just like program better? Like that seems like the answer to a lot of things.
Sure.
So I think there's that like one, the old technology just is like, it's more difficult to evolve the technology than to come up with a new one. And then I think there's like a social aspect, which is like, there must be some, as we say in the computer world, law, which as I like to joke, whenever we call something a law, it's just like some idea we had after observing some things.
Right.
It's not actually proven out or scientifically anything. But like,
it sounds better than, hypothesis or
right. Like
informed observation or my thoughts.
Yeah, it's not like, Conway's napkin jotting or anything like that. It
doesn't carry the same weight.
No. Like there's some, is the Peter principle the one that you get promoted to your level of incompetence? Yep. There's some positive version of that in the context we're talking about where the capable people are promoted outside of the areas that they can be helpful in. Sure. Right. And so you've got a technology around and someone's been successful at it and they get promoted to some other area. And now that's not their responsibility anymore. And you have new people come along and they're in charge of this technological space. And so, they probably end up doing their own stuff. They don't necessarily have the loyalty or the understanding or caring about that area. And then, I think there was a good article from, maybe it was, I forget when it was from, sometime within the last week, that was basically, who is it from? It's from someone who works at some startup now, and they used to work at Engine Yard. And it was basically like, I forget what it was called exactly, but it was basically like, hey, everyone keeps saying like platform as a service is dead, but like really, it's never really left. Let's like look at it. And I think why someone would think that platform as a service is dead is because like it's not popular to talk about. Like it's hard to go over it, but like to summarize what this, because this article goes over all the great scenarios. But I think one of the main ones that we in the tech world get why we sort of reinvent stuff is there is, I don't know, for whatever reason, to use like, there should be a better source for this, but to use like an old Nixon idea, there's like the silent majority, which, to be clear, I don't know if that was true back in his time, but the concept is nice, which is that like the majority of people using some technology you probably never hear about.
Sure.
Right. And so there's a lot of people using some existing technology. They're totally fine with it, does what they want. And but no one really hears about it. So therefore it seems like, one, it's dead. And then two, when someone who wants to invent some new thing comes along, they just assume that this thing, like no one's using it and it's dead. So they just reinvent it. Right. Sure. And then you have other forces that come into play why we're always rewriting stuff. Like if the decision to keep using a technology is based on the valuation of startups who are championing that technology, or based on the like commercial success of a technology, and then either one of those goes down, then you're going to assume the technology is bad and you should come up with a new one, right? Because if whether you're in a big company that isn't like, I mean, anytime you're looking to invest, whether you're a big company or a startup, time and money into advancing a technology, right? You're going to say like, does this technology have a future? And there's three ways you could determine that. One, it could be like, is it a good technology? And therefore people will use it. You could say, are the startups, or you need some like indicators of it. Like, are the startups that are around this technology, are their valuations high and do they have big exits? Or are they like kind of like failing? And then three, like, is there a lot of revenue currently in this technology?
Sure.
And so if all of those are no, then you're like, why would I be invested in this? And you're going to want to start something new. Now, what the problem is that like all the same problems probably still exist.
Right.
Right. And like, then you get into the issue where then you're just reinventing the wheel or evolving it. And I remember this used to be like, there's always, I don't really, back when it was Slashdot, now Hacker News or whatever, there's always a post that's like, why haven't you tried this thing? Because that's also what they sound like. But like, how about this thing that solves all these same problems? You should solve that, or you should use this. And really, it's true. We should just not reinvent the wheel. I'm not really sure. I think the other reason is just like, programmers like to build things.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're going to do. And you just have to accept that every 5 or 10 years, we're just going to rewrite everything as a new thing. And otherwise, it's very stressful and upsetting.
Well, and my friend Neil Ford likes to say that meta work is more interesting than work. So I could build this application in Java, C, C++, or I could write a new programming language. Now, that would be a much better use of my intellect, and my programming abilities would be to create a whole new framework, a whole new language, a whole new platform.
Right, exactly.
Why would I use this existing one? And we're also, as developers, I think, really, really good at coming up with this edge case. Well, but see, it can't handle this special thing that we need to do. That's why we need to build our own. And we use that as this mega excuse as to why we can't possibly use the off-the-shelf thing in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's, it's people want to build stuff. And that's what they'll, like in our business at Pivotal and now at VMware, this doesn't actually happen in recent years as much as it used to. Like, people will just say they want to build their own platform or their own Kubernetes distro or their own whatever. And of course, being the vendor who wants to sell them something, we're like, that's a bad idea. But people always frequently in the past wanted to build their own stuff rather than just buy it, which.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, and I think it's a perfectly natural desire of someone who has a developer engineering mindset to want to build something because it's fun. But then, the fun part is like the part that's not fun is like everything that happens after like you commit the code and like integrating it together and all the people you have to talk with. Like, it's just it's tedious. It's almost like what I imagine getting like building permits are, right? Like, you got to fill out this paperwork and do this thing.
Yeah, that's the JIRA of the physical world, is building permits. So Fuel says that apparently no one wants to maintain church clocks. So they built one to last forever in 1300, but by 1400, nobody wanted to renovate it. So guess we're building a new clock. So I guess that's how that works. And then
let me ask you a question. You read a lot of books. You've written
I try.
some pamphlets and books and things. What is your position on when you're discussing some concept, like we could have, like whatever concept we were just discussing there, and then and no insult to the current thing, it just raises this rhetorical tool in my head, where you're writing about programming, and then all of a sudden you make an analogy to something that's not programming to prove your point, right?
Yeah.
So like you could be writing about having a hygienic enterprise architecture, and then all of a sudden, like, you hear about church clocks between 1300 to 1400. And the reader is supposed to be like, got it. I should have more UML review meetings. like what? Like I feel like doing an analogy like that is powerful, but you have to be like careful in your writing because it can just be kind of like it can amount to like parent advice where like it makes a lot of sense to the parent, but the kid is like, yes, but I would like to eat 10 cookies before bedtime.
Right.
And you're like, it's kind of like, if you put too much like high octane fuel into a car just to have fun, but then you blow up your engine, and then where are you? And the kid's like, then I'm still wanting to eat cookies? I don't understand. So what do you do when you're
cookies or not?
When you confront this as a reader or a writer, how do you deal with that kind of rhetorical tool?
That's so. I think it's funny because one of Fuel's comments from a while back was law equals my story, and I think that's a good way of phrasing this. This is my story, but I want it to sound like more than that, so it's a law. Uh, I think that's a great question, and you know, one of the things that I've struggled with a little bit is, I am the parent of a teenager, and Evan and I were leaving the house to go somewhere, and he looked at me and he said, Dad, sometimes I just need to make my own mistakes.
Uh huh.
And I think that's one of the really hard things about parenting is that you do have to give your kids the space to learn their own way without ideally them harming themselves irreparably. And
Right, right, right.
there's that old analogy of, no, you let the kid kind of get near the stove and they'll know that it's hot and they'll back away, but you won't obviously let them put their face on the stove or something like that. And so you'll rescue them from that, but they'll learn on their own, and then they don't have that negative from mom or dad yelling at them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it, is that there are some mistakes that it's safe for a team or a developer to make, and it's like, you'll learn better if you make this mistake yourself. I think we've all at some point or another deleted part of a hard drive in
Uh huh.
inadvertently, and then once you've done that, you're like, well, I'm never going to run that script without trying it dry first, and I'm going to double and triple check to make sure I'm in the right directory before I execute this, or maybe I'll put a little friction in before this destructive action happens. But then there's other things where you do have to say, not, this is not a mistake I can let you make on your own. There's reasons why we have some of these processes in place. There's reasons why we do things a certain way, and our industry is still growing and learning. We're going through a lot of those growing pains, and I take a lot of analogy, I guess, from air travel, since we spend a lot of time on airplanes. There's a lot of things we've learned about air travel in the last 100-ish plus years we've been doing it, and I feel like we're going to keep getting better and better at this software thing, and hopefully we won't all have to continually make the same mistakes again and again and
Hmm.
again and again. But then there's also the inevitability that some people, the only way they're going to learn is if they
I
make
guess
their own.
so. I guess if you're going to use a out of domain analogy to explain or convince someone of a good idea,
Mm-hmm.
what you're relying on them is to extract out a pattern and believe that that same pattern applies to their domain,
Sure.
right? And so like if you're like, well, it was found in some study that like doctors who use checklists like leave sponges in their patients less.
Right.
And so what you want a programmer to think is that like, oh, I should have a checklist, even though it's really tedious and annoying to like manually go through all the stuff that I know that I'm doing, because doctors fit. I see how doctors would also think that same sort of thing, but it actually helps them to have a checklist. So therefore, I should also have a checklist, right? As
Right.
opposed to saying like, you know, there was a study where programmers had checklists and they did better or worse,
Right.
right? Which sounds like TPS reports or whatever. But yeah, I guess it has to be just like a really strong, because the thing you don't want to fall into. I remember once I saw some somewhat famous author going over his book, and like, I don't know. We were talking about like business strategy or something, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, we're getting quotes from like famous, from like Gandhi and things like that. And of course, Gandhi's great, but it's sort of
Right.
like, I don't know, man. Like, and making analogies about like the concrete and the cardboard industry, and
Sure.
to things like Gandhi. I'm not sure that's really applicable
Might be
as
a bit of
far
a
as like,
stretch. Might be a bit of a
yeah,
stretch.
you can't really transfer those best practices
Right.
as
Right.
well.
Yeah, well, checklists help keep airplanes in the air. You're absolutely right, Fuel. As someone who spends time on airplanes, I'm perfectly happy that they have a checklist that they go through. And then apparently, if we want to get somebody to do it, just say, do it this way and you'll make billions. But I absolutely adore this one. I'm always trying, or I'm wondering, like, where is that line between letting them learn from their own mistakes without it costing me my weekend? I think that's not a bad analogy of, well, if you make a mistake here, I'll just correct it the next hour. Otherwise, I'm not going to lose any sleep over the weekend. Is probably not a bad line in the sand.
Yeah.
But there's one other interesting thing here that I wanted to talk about with the Fuel made. That the good thing is, if you don't like something, just wait 5 years and it'll be gone.
Yeah. You've
I
got
mean,
you've
there's
got
some truth to that, right?
evolution
Like,
there.
I mean, haven't we all had that technology? We're like, oh God, not this, and then it just dies of its own accord. Although the scary thing is sometimes we all wish it would die, and then 10 years later we're like, how come we're still using this thing?
Yeah, or there's like your buddy Java, which has been around forever. That
Right?
seems to do well.
Right, exactly. And with that in mind, Deshaun looked back and there was a release of Java 7 back in January of this year, although apparently that was paid support releases. So there you go. You know, if you're willing to pay for it. I know at one point Microsoft would continue to give you licenses to Windows XP if you were essentially willing to fund the developers that were going to work on it.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Basically what it boiled down to. That was the rate. Like per quarter per instance pricing was essentially going to pay the salary of the developers. So
Yes.
yeah, so Fuel says a lot of people love to quote Sun Tzu but never get the meaning, and then
Oh
just end up
yeah. See,
confused.
that's a good example. That's perfect. Whenever you hear someone like using, the art of war in a business context, like
Right.
this, it seems like, well, I mean, hopefully your business isn't killing people. That would be
Hope
nice.
not.
And I guess you could extend like having the sun at your back, which I think that's a Sun Tzu thing, like to the business world. Although not really. Like it doesn't. The problem with analogies like that is too often it just results, boils down to like, well, you should do things that work. I
Right.
think is what the which I guess that could summarize a lot of business books. Just do things that
Sure.
work.
Sure.
Yes.
Or my thing worked in this one context, so obviously it'll work everywhere without interruption, without change.
Right.
And
Right.
Christine, my wife, asked me to listen to this podcast about college admissions processes and whatnot. And
Uh huh.
near as I could tell, the author of this book had gone to Stanford, and but he was trying to give all this advice how it's okay to not go to Stanford and whatnot, and how you shouldn't be so fixated on these high rejection schools as he refers to it. Although
Oh
he
yeah.
apparently went back and looked at the data, and when he enrolled at Stanford, they accepted like 22% of applicants, and now it's down to like 2.2% or something of that effect.
That's probably
And
because more
so
people apply, right?
I'm sure that's part of it. And the other part of me is like, so you're kind of, it's like, but you got into Stanford and you got all of the positives that go along with that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's probably not a universal truth, but probably a lot of the people telling you that you don't need to go to college went to college
Right.
is what I would guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So, and then I posted up, here's the article that you're talking about. I'll have to check that one out. I like that. I'll have to put
It's
that into
very
my,
systematic, almost
okay.
almost to a fault. But
Sure.
it's
Sure.
kind of like I don't know how you are, but when not you don't know because this is in my head, so hopefully you don't know. But like I'll wake up at like 2 a.m. in the morning sometimes in a bad mood, and that article is like speaking of using analogies to thing. It has the scenario structure that like my worrying does, where you're just like, all right, let's get the big board out and write down the complete possibility tree of everything
Let's go
that
to the
could
big board.
possibly happen just while I'm laying here trying to go to sleep. But
Oh
you can
God, I
see
hate that.
the author there lays out like 6 or 8 different scenarios and like models and then kind of
Right.
walks through each of them. I forget. I think. Well, I think the headline says it all. Pass is not dead is
Right.
what they don't even make a joke about Easter candy or anything, which I thought
Oh,
was great for them.
sure. Sure. Fuel wants to quote you on the just do things that work. I think that's a good summation of every business book and probably every how to do anything better. Just do things that work.
It's true. Yeah.
Way to, I mean, see, this is what we come to you for, Cote, is your
Uh huh.
ability to distill down these concepts to the tagline and then
That's right.
just get there right now.
It only took us 58 minutes and 36 seconds.
Exactly. So, the past thing is interesting to me because I think there's still an awful lot of folks that ultimately want that CF push like experience of, here's my code, just go make it run somewhere. I don't care about the details. And yet I'm kind of amazed how many people keep trying to essentially reinvent that when there are options that exist to do that. And I'm always kind of curious as to kind of the why of it. And I feel like some of it is this, but we can do it better. And, but this is cooler technology. And at the end of the day, the goal of this is to get features and functionality into production as reliably and repeatably as possible. And we as an industry seem really good at trying to come up with ways to not do that. And I find it surprising that we can't just, hey, this thing, let's do things that work and keep doing that. No, 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 we got to try something different, and we have to go in a different direction because reasons.
Yes.
Because I still think that CF push experience, the first time I did that, just blew my mind.
Yeah.
Here is my blog. Here is my website. Oh, there's a new version of Nginx. Fantastic. I don't care. Just update it for me. And I think of that when I put either my architect or my developer hat on. That's all I want to focus on. It's just writing the code, solving business problems, not dealing with, for lack of a better phrase, dial tone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe so the question is so why don't we have that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, I don't know. I mean, I don't. You and I probably aren't going to solve that here this morning, this evening, this afternoon. But
I think there's two things. And it's a little bit of like the scattered summary of that article I was going over is like, well, one, I think there probably is a lot more like success to PaaS than most people know about, right? Like,
right.
so there is actually like, as the person in the article wrote up, like, he tried to find, I think it's a he, or I'll just say they tried to find the revenue for Heroku, but Salesforce doesn't break it out, so you don't really know. It's part of their Lightning One or whatever, and you can get a value. I think Engine Yard, as they note, was purchased for 200 million, so forth and so on, right? And so like, for one thing, it's hard to get your hands around how much revenue there is in PaaS. Now, one of the indicators they use, I think, is I forget which one they use, but there's all these sites that will report on, like you can tell by going to various websites what stack they're running, and so like Heroku is actually higher up there than you would think, right? So there is a lot of PaaS usage. You just don't hear about it. For one thing,
well, it doesn't make for a viral tweet.
Yeah. And now.
How we succeeded with a 10-year-old technology is not the kind of thing that most companies are going to plaster on their website.
Right. And that's not to be like, some snarky like, well, I've solved the problem, because like obviously, if you're successful in silence, eventually you're going to be a failure, right? Like you have to promote, which goes back to the premise of your question. And then, I think the other thing is like, yeah, it's generally you have to pay for it, and boy, people don't like paying for things. Now, developers especially don't like paying for things, and people will say like, oh, blah blah blah, whatever. But like, I think the issue you have with paying for stuff in IT is while developers use the stuff, and in some cases can be like kingmakers or at least king helpers, like they're not usually the ones who pay for anything. And it's usually like your operations and infrastructures people who pay for stuff. And then I think a major issue they have is like they don't really like talk with developers as much as they should. And developers don't like operations people. They just don't like each other. So it's like, I mean,
we keep bringing down prod. That's why they don't like us.
Yeah. And I think we both have experienced this a lot in our many years in the industry, and especially at Pivotal and VMware, right? Is like, it's I guess as one of my old friends says, like the only thing that's shocking is that we're still shocked. But it's shocking that like you'll encounter operations people and they're like, I don't really even know who the developers are. Like I don't really talk with them. So the people who have the budget to buy the PaaSes, or not even buy them, to run them, aren't really spending a lot of time talking with the people who use them, right? And so it's they build up these platforms, and then the developers like maybe would like them initially, but then like don't really feel invested, or they don't feel like it's theirs, and then so the developers just go off, as we were talking about earlier, and try to use their own stuff, which is certainly possible. And so you have that issue, and then I mean, I think the other issue that you have is like us vendors. It goes back to what I was saying, is like the other issue, again, covered in that PaaS is not dead article, sort of if the is the right word, obliquely, like kind of, it could be gone into more depth.
Sure.
Is I mean, essentially, what we think is popular in the tech world, and by tech world, I don't mean, well, also Facebook, but in kind of like the software vendor world, is whatever is getting a lot of demonstrable revenue or is getting a lot of venture funding and has exits, we think is what's successful, right?
Sure.
And then so there's this like loop, probably like an unhelpful, vicious loop where like, for example, if it turns out that like building a successful PaaS is like a 5-10 year sort of thing before you have like the market using it. But if the investment cycle is like less than that, and all these companies that are building PaaSes like get defunded and don't work out, then like you're going to assume that it's just bad. And then so you should just get rid of that stuff. So I don't know. And then the other thing that I've been thinking a lot recently is like, I mean, there's also an issue of like private cloud versus public cloud problems where
Sure.
I feel like a lot of the discussion that we have is just like people want to use public cloud. Right? And so like if you were to have, I mean, I don't have firsthand experience doing this, but I feel like if you're using the public cloud, you can pretty much have a quote unquote CF push experience because like you don't have to maintain a data center.
Right.
And the stack, it's just like there, right?
Yeah.
And so like, so in that way, like if you just go to the public cloud as a developer would want to, then like you have what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And like,
No, I hear you.
which then I guess the way you would test that out is you would say like, so each of the, I mean, you have to categorize in the public clouds, what are the PaaSes and how much usage do they get?
Sure.
And that would be the big test about PaaS being successful or not.
Sure.
And then also, I mean, I think there's the fifth or sixth thing, which is like, you know, as our old friend Andrew Clay Schaefer used to say, you know, it's a lot of work to install a cloud, right?
Yeah.
And which kind of gets back to the public cloud point that if like you don't just want to use the public cloud thing, or if you want to use the raw infrastructure resources on public cloud to run your own PaaS, like now you're managing a cloud, and like that's difficult,
Right.
and so like it's hard to, so you have to like really want to do it, otherwise it's a little difficult to go about doing. But I think it also comes back to like what you were saying. A lot of is just like. And I'm like shrugging my shoulder and being dismissive, but I think it's a very real like tastes change and people want to build new things. And so if you don't like maintain that stranglehold on success, perceived success and kind of ubiquity, you're just gonna like lose relevance in the stack. And you know, that's no fun.
I mean, I think part of what that makes me think of is I know in I want to say in the fast food industry, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I'll just make it up. If you don't introduce a new product every N number of weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is, people forget about you basically. And, you know, I think there's some of that in software too, where it's almost like, well, if you don't have something new coming out, if there's not new content, then where's your relevancy? And, you know, I think that plays into this in some way. And, you know, Fuel dropped this in the comments about CV driven development. I call that RDD, resume driven development. You can tell which continent we both come from, but I think there's a lot of that, you know, there's a lot of, but I want to build my own thing because I think I can do it better. And, you know, I think, you know, Fuel's talking about how it used to be a hobby to build it, but then nobody wants to maintain it because that's not interesting. You know, it's a lot more fun to build greenfield than it is to deal with legacy or heritage stuff for sure. And we don't like to think about that, but it's part of the territory. And
yeah. And you know, the I don't have an explanation of this, but I spend a lot of time thinking about the following as an answer to your question, which is like, I still, even though we work where we do and so forth, like I still don't know why and how it is that Kubernetes became successful, like as rapidly as it did, right? Because like even now, it's like Well, it seems to be okay now, but only until recently. Like it didn't actually like do everything out of the box that people thought it did. And so
Right.
there were like 3 or 4 years, and we saw this firsthand. Where basically like innovation in the paths, and I would even say like the application development stack, basically just froze as to, but got sludgy. What do you
Yeah.
call it when you just like it became like molasses in winter or whatever, because everyone was like, well, obviously Kubernetes, right?
Right.
And then like, but it wasn't actually like it didn't do all of that, and so like, and hence you have like the old CNCF landscape that you've got all these things that you add on top of Kubernetes, right? And like again, I don't even know if what I said is accurate, but it certainly felt like
Sure.
there was a lot of like, let's wait another year before we do anything because Kubernetes does that, or
Right.
and it came to replace all of the time and the mind share that PaaSes have. I mean, that's
Sure.
you can look. Everyone went to Kubernetes, and like there was something that happened there that I don't quite have an accounting for. Like I watched that 2-part Kubernetes documentary. Like we worked with several of the people who do that. We're in that industry, and I still don't know what was going on there, such that it like worked, such
Yeah.
that you had like it's something different than like the I don't know, maybe it is like a innovator's dilemma crossing the chasm thing where you have a lower functional, much lower price substitute that gets like a small amount of people using it, that lets it stay alive long enough to grow features and market share, and at the same time, as I was just describing, stall out the fully featured, the more fully featured, more expensive things to kind of.
Right.
But like, was that planned out, or did that just like happen?
I think the odds of that actually being planned out in any of the instances where that has happened across technologies or industries, I think are
Yeah.
slim to none, honestly.
And now in the last few years, like it's totally fine, and it's like it has become the thing, which
Sure.
is all legit. But there was a period there where it was like that's where you need to get a time machine and hop back to like
Right.
maybe 20, what would be the significant years? Maybe 2017 and 2018.
Yes.
And then be like, what is happening here? Like what are the dynamics and the patterns we can learn from when we want to introduce, when we're going to go through, as I think of it, like the eternal reoccurrence of the platform, or like whatever, like in the
How
next
do we
round.
replicate this?
Yeah, like how are we going to identify that this is happening again, so we can just shift over
Right.
and to whatever the new thing is that comes along.
Sure.
Because at some point, there's going to be Kubernetes part 2,
Of course.
plus plus, and it's going to be
course.
like come from some strange place. It's going to be much less functional.
Right.
It's gonna be like fun, like a fun trick to like show how you can actually install it. You're gonna have to use all the like. It's gonna be a classic like crossing the chasm thing where it'll be like
Right.
much lower functionality, also much cheaper, and then it'll just take hold and
Right.
win over the next 2 or 4 years. And
Do you think it'll use YAML?
probably it'll probably use some new thing like that. See, that would be another good study. You probably have firsthand experience of this, and maybe someone can follow up with us. But like, so we used to have INI files, right? And then we had .property files in Java, and then we had XML files, right? And
Yep.
then I guess before that we had make files, and then
Yeah.
and dot files as they were
Dot
called.
files. Yep.
And then after XML we had, I don't really know. Then we had JSON,
JSON.
which is not exactly. I mean, JSON is also like a protocol. It's not a protocol. What do you call that? A messaging format. I've lost
Yeah.
all my words, but
Yeah.
you have whatever that was. Then we had JSON, which I guess you could also use as like a configuration file.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we had YAML, right? And like that would be another good study. Is like at each moment there, like each of those things seemed great for a
Yeah.
while, and then
Right.
all of a sudden it was everyone's like what they hated.
I hate this.
And so we came up with this new thing, and then here we are with phrases like YAML hell, right? And
Right.
it's just sort of like, well, now what? And then like I think like if you like, so the Docker file format was kind of at the same time as YAML, so they had their own kind of format, and then also you could
Right.
have YAML. And now like I did an interview at VMware Explorer with Solomon, and they were kind of going over like the Dagger like whatever it is format, and that's like a whole new format that you
Right.
can
Right.
use. And so there you go. There's the answer to your question, Nate. Solve that problem.
Got it.
Your
Got it.
basic configuration file formats. How did they evolve? And let's go through that story. That you got 250, 300 pages to do it in. I'm sure you can
Perfect.
solve this mystery for
Perfect.
us.
Love it. I'm on it. So Fuel thinks it'll be Toml or Toml, and
More
but
like
also a fan of
tumult.
any tumult more, but it also a fan of INI files and what will replace Git. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to think about that. That'll give me some indigestion to figure out what the switch is going to be there. Maybe I mean something always does, and I mean I think that's also part of just being in this industry is realizing that there will be another one of these, and I think one of the things you gain through experience, we started this talking about older programmers and how we used to ignore them back in the day, and then you realize, wait, actually they had something valuable for us to learn from, is realizing that there will be another thing and recognizing when that shift starts to happen. And then how do we as a team, as an organization, start to move in that direction? And what does that look like? Because we don't have the luxury of just, all right, nuke and pave and start over. And I think that's one of those challenges that you and I spend a lot of time dealing with our clients about is, well, how do you do this digital transformation thing for whatever value of digital transformation, flies in your world?
Yep. Yep. Well, I'm going to look forward to that book. You should
All right.
maybe
Well,
maybe at
you've
least
given me something else to do.
a conference presentation, the history of configuration
Yeah,
files.
that sounds more interesting. I think that's where we'll start. Well, Cote, I could talk to you for hours. There's no getting around that. I genuinely appreciate this. We may have to do a part two because I have a whole list of things I wanted to talk about with being an expat and barbecue and things of that nature. So maybe we'll have to do that
That'd be
again in the
great.
future. So we'll find some time there. I do know you and I are going to get to hang out in San Francisco in December, and I cannot tell you how excited I am for that. It was great to see you again in person back in June, and so I'm looking forward to. I really miss the fact that you and I used to be in the same space every few months, and now we're not. So
Yep.
fingers crossed there. We'll get that to happen. But I know it's late for you, and so I think we can probably call it a night for you and an afternoon for me.
It's true.
So
If people want to go to Spring One, which is in San Francisco, December 6th to 8th, there's lots of, I think we have several of our talks posted. There's lots
we
of
do.
programming things, architecture, DevOps, platform engineering, even business
Spring
stuff.
topics on spring.
But they should go to spring1.io and peruse
Yes, they
what's
should.
there, and they're going to want to register. And when they register, they can get $200 off if they use the code COTE200. That's
There you go.
COTE 200 when you register at spring1.io to learn about your programming, your operations, your DevOps stuff, maybe even SRE. I don't know, and how to change the way your organization operates so you can be better at software. But
There
you
you
can get
go.
$200 off with that
What
code.
was that code again, Cote?
It's COTE 200. It's right there.
That implies there must be one for me too.
Well, you have to ask for that. It's like vanity license plates.
Oh, okay. Because I definitely know I saw the one about Deshaun. We are sharing the discount code. I know there's certainly a generic one. I've seen the generic one.
Oh yeah, it's
So,
got lots of underscores. It's
all about the
it's real humdinger, as they used to say back in the .ini file days.
exactly.
All right, yeah. Well, it was fun talking. We'll have to
Pleasure's
get
always
together
good.
some
We'll
other
do
time.
this again, man. I appreciate your time, and we'll call it a day here. We'll put up the bumper, and we'll call it a quits.
Bye bye.
Bye.